fellow Americans.
You might be wondering, why in the world is there a 30-minute countdown before the show starts? Well, we actually start live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time, so this whole 30-minute countdown is a chance for YouTube and Rumble to send out their alerts and notifications, so we encourage you to gather up and hang out with everyone in the chat room. So every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time is when we do this show live. You can join us for the countdown if you like, or just set your clock and reminder that at 4 p.m. Eastern is when we go live. You can also make sure you subscribe and turn on that bell notification, so hopefully you will get a notification.
What do you have to say about dictators of countries like Indonesia, who we sell weapons to, yet they are slaughtering people in East Timor? What do you have to say about Israel, who is slaughtering Palestinians, who impose martial law? What do you have to say about that? Those are our allies. Why do we sell weapons to these countries? Why do we support them? Why do we bomb Iraq when it commits similar problems?
There are various examples of things that are not right in this world, and the United States is trying. I really am surprised that people feel that it is necessary to defend the rights of Saddam Hussein, when what we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that he does not use weapons of mass destruction.
I'd like to...
Who are shouting? Just a moment.
I'm not defending him in the least. What I am saying is that there needs to be consistent application of U.S. foreign policy. We cannot support people who are committing the same violations because they are political allies. That is not acceptable. We cannot violate UN resolutions when it is convenient to us. You're not answering my question, Madam Albright.
You briefed the press, did you not, when you were there?
Well, I had several jobs. One of my jobs was that of analyst. I also was an interrogator and indeed briefed the press when we, the CIA, wanted to circulate disinformation on a particular issue. Disinformation is not necessarily a lie. It may be a half-truth. And we would pick out a journalist. I would go do the briefing and hope that he would put the information in print.
What was your percentage of success?
We were pretty successful in planting information of a rather rarefied nature. For instance, if we wanted to get across to the American public that the North Vietnamese were building up their force structure in South Vietnam, I would go to a journalist and advise him that in the past 6 months, X number of North Vietnamese forces had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail system through southern Laos. Now, there is no way a journalist can check that information. That's data derived from radio intercepts, spy in the sky photography. So either he goes with the information or he doesn't, and ordinarily or usually, the journalist would go with it because it looked like some kind of exclusive. Go after these gentlemen. I would be directed to cultivate them, to spend time with them at the Caravel Hotel or the Continental Hotel, to socialize with them, and slowly but surely to try to gain their confidence by dolloping out valid information which was true. And then I would drop into a conversation the data that we wanted to get across, which might not be true. One piece of data, for instance, that we managed to plan in the New Yorker magazine had to do with a supposed North Vietnamese effort in 1973 to develop airfields along the border of South Vietnam. The reason we wanted to plant this information was that we were trying to persuade the U.S. Congress that Saigon should continue to get a great deal of aid and that the North Vietnamese were the chief violators of the ceasefire accord. That was printed in the New Yorker magazine under the byline of Robert Chaplin, as indeed was a great deal of such information which we tried to circulate.
Frank, a two-part question. What were the objectives of or what was the objective of the CIA? What about the moral implications of what you were doing in feeding disinformation? Did the objective override the moral implications, moral problems?
Well, the objective of the agency in general is to generate intelligence and get it back to Washington, to get at the truth and make sure the policymakers understand it. When you plant disinformation, you are diverging from that objective, and I think probably in retrospect, it was very counterproductive. I am, as an ex-CIA agent, opposed to the disinformation activities in which I was involved. I admit that I was involved, and I think it served no useful purpose. Propagandizing the American public or Congress is not the CIA's job. As to the morality of what the CIA was doing or that particular activity, the war was a very relative thing. It was a relativist environment, and morality seldom came into play when you were operating in the field. In my estimation, a CIA man should be amoral. That may sound pretty shocking to somebody, but what if my morality were that of a Nazi or agent, if you will? You wouldn't want me to be your intelligence officer. Keep the morals out of intelligence. Keep the truth in, and stay away from disinformation.
It would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
And it might sound radical, colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun, it's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organisation should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
We become involved when disinformation poses a threat to the security of our country. It is when there's a connectivity to a threat to our country. It could be a threat, a connectivity to violence. And what this working group does, is precisely what I would think you would want it to do, which is to take a look at the work, the disinformation work that our department has done, and ask the following questions. Do we have policies? Do we have guardrails? Do we have standards?
But here's the problem.
Enforce?
We can't even agree. We can't even agree what disinformation is. You can't even agree that it was disinformation, that the Russians fed information to the Steele dossier. If you can't agree to that, how are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
Senator, I have 2 points, if I may finish. Number one, that what this office, what this working group does, because it's not an office, what this working group does is ensure that there are guardrails definitions, standards to make sure that the free speech rights, the civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights of individuals.
So
are
do you
not
think
impinged,
do you think
number
COVID
one.
do you think
And
COVID
number
do you think
two,
COVID
if I may,
do you think COVID disinformation threatens our national security?
And number two, if I may, Senator, and number two, is it your proposition that when the cartels spread disinformation with respect to our immigration policies to try to lure vulnerable migrants to our border illegally?
I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
You would know this this is a bit of an aside, but in terms of how you think about problem sets, when I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
We had a good discussion on ensuring global energy security and adequate oil supplies to support global economic growth, and that will begin shortly. I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen. The Saudis share that urgency, and based on our discussions today, I expect we'll see further steps in the coming weeks.
Are you worried about
Hey everyone, just as a reminder, our show starts at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, just a few minutes from now, but I should remind you that we have a daily newsletter. It's totally free. Natalie and I work very hard on it every morning over a cup of coffee, putting the stories together that we think are important that the mainstream media is going to ignore. All you need to do is go to our website. It's just redacted.inc. Put in your email address. We won't ever sell your email to anybody. And then you'll receive a welcome email, and all you need to do is verify that email, and 7 a.m. Eastern Time is when we send out our daily newsletter. And it's about 5 or 10 minutes in length that you can read it over your cup of coffee. And like I said, we cover 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day, plus a couple of things you might have missed while you were sleeping. We try to have some fun with it, add a little humor into it. And again, it's a great way to start off your morning. But it's also a great way for us to stay connected with you as well, because we've been banned and blocked on some of these platforms before, where we haven't been allowed to post anything, not even a community post. So the only way for us to stay connected with you is through our newsletter. We were able to send out a newsletter and say, hey everyone, we're blocked for the next week, and let you know what was actually going on with our show. Anyway, go to redacted.inc and sign up for the free newsletter, and it'll be posted first thing in the morning over your cup of coffee.
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies. The media could have stopped it if they had searched deep enough. If they hadn't reprinted government propaganda, they could have stopped it. But what does that mean? Well, that means basically populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars. Populations don't willingly and with open eyes go into a war. So if we have a good media environment, then we'll also have a peaceful environment.
You killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war
George,
after
if
what
I
you've
was
already
still in
done.
Parliament,
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons and the capability to rapidly produce more, many more. And he has the ability to dispense these lethal poisons and diseases in ways that can cause massive death and destruction. If biological weapons seem too terrible to contemplate, chemical weapons are equally chilling. UNMOVIC already laid out much of this, and it is documented for all of us to read in UNSCOM's 1999 report on the subject. If we consider just one category of missing weaponry, 6,500 bombs from the Iran-Iraq war, UNMOVIC says the amount of chemical agent in them would be in the order of 1,000 tons. These quantities of chemical weapons are now unaccounted for. Dr. Blick says, quipped that, quote, mustard gas is not marmalade. You are supposed to know what you did with it. We believe Saddam Hussein knows what he did with it, and he has not come clean with the international community. We have evidence these weapons existed. What we don't have is evidence from Iraq that they have been destroyed or where they are. That is what we are still waiting for.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the president now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the majors. The majors' assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the president have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone, or to take the nation to war partway, or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip, because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector. You didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in. So what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Scott, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of, you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, They get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." I said, "We're going to war with Iraq? Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, "I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Hey everyone, Clayton here. The show is going to start at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I should remind you that we have a VIP community. It's our Redacted Rebel VIP community. Now, this show is totally free, what you're watching right now, right? You can subscribe here on YouTube and Rumble, totally free. But if you'd like to support independent journalism, we are run by you. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this show. We wouldn't be able to hire the team that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the servers that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the reporters that we have, the team that we have. So you can support us by going to redacted.inc, and on the right side of your screen, you'll see a VIP community button. Just click that, and for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support us. We put out exclusive content, early interviews that no one else will see, live streams just for our VIP Rebel community. So again, it's totally free to watch this show, but if you do want to support independent journalism, we would really appreciate it. Come on over to redacted.inc, click on that community button, and decide if you want to sign up or not. It's totally up to you. We thank you. And meanwhile, the show will start in just a few moments at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
Well, one of the 4 principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories. For example, in my war, the Angola war that I helped to manage, 1/3 of my staff was propaganda. Ironically, it's called covert action inside the CIA. Outside, that means the violent part. I had propagandists all over the world, principally in London, Kinshasa, and Zambia. We would take stories which we would write and put them in the Zambia Time, and then pull them out and send them to a journalist on our payroll in Europe. But his cover story, you see, would be that he'd gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia Time. We had the complicity of the government of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, if you will, to put these false stories into his newspapers. But after that point, the journalists, Reuters and AFP, the management was not witting of it. Now, our contact man in Europe was, and we pumped just dozens of stories about Cuban atrocities, Cuban rapists. In one case, we had the Cuban rapists caught and tried by the Ovimbundu maidens who had been their victims, and then we ran photographs that made almost every newspaper in the country of the Cubans being executed by the Ovimbunda women who supposedly had been their victims.
These were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast and that sort of totally false propaganda.
The only reason that I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the press gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary, hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome, everybody, to Redacted on this Thursday. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natalie Morris.
So glad to have you here. On this show, we cover the stories the corporate media ignores, and we have a very busy show for you on this Thursday. We're going to look at how the economy is really in trouble, but the Biden administration is telling us that, of course, everything is fine, that Bidenomics is helping all Americans. They're citing new job numbers, but what's behind those job numbers? What's actually happening in this economy? Wait till you hear the mortgage numbers, specifically where we could see interest rates go for mortgages coming up. Peter Schiff is going to be joining us to talk about the latest on the economy.
Plus, we have an update with the war in Ukraine with increased attacks by the Donbass. Now, U.S. officials are saying they don't really like how Ukraine is running this. They think they're doing some dirty business, but they're still going to support them. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
And election day is tomorrow. So the reason these attacks, of course, are happening, stepped up attacks in the Donbass and Donetsk and Luhansk and all of those areas right now is because elections kick off tomorrow.
Plus, we have Carol Roth, who's going to join us and talk about her new book, You Will Own Nothing, and specifically what we can do as globalists continue to take away power. She, again, says, if you own nothing, they own you. So how can you own control of your life? How can you keep control of your life? Plus, an update on lab-grown meat. Now scientists want to grow fruit, lab-grown fruit. There's a lot of questions. We could put Bill Gates, preservative spray on this lab-grown fruit. And then could we even call that food? All that and more as Redacted starts right now.
All right, welcome into the big show. Hey, I want a point of order here because we have a big documentary that's about to roll out tomorrow here on Redacted, and we want to tell you all about it. It's our Redacted Presents, a brand new documentary on Rumble exclusively. So you need to come over to Rumble and subscribe there to be able to watch the launch of our brand new documentary on 9/11. And the 9/11 attacks specifically, and the anthrax attacks, and the truth around 9/11. David, what time will it premiere tomorrow on Friday?
Yeah, it's going to premiere at 1 o'clock p.m. Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern.
Okay, 4 o'clock Eastern. 4 o'clock Eastern.
So the time that we are normally here, our live show, it will be this program instead of us here on a live show. And again, it has to be on Rumble for reasons that we should not have to specify. And we're excited to bring it to Rumble so that we know that that is a platform where it's welcomed.
Yeah, we're really excited about this. An amazing documentary, and it is going to be censored when we release it on YouTube eventually next week. However, it will be censored. There are things we had to cut out of the documentary because YouTube will not allow us to show those things. So it will debut officially on Rumble tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So please make sure you're subscribed.
And
Go ahead.
I want to point something out as well. Like I saw a lot of comments on when we posted the trailer and stuff of people don't even think Rumble will allow this. But not only is Rumble allowing this documentary, they helped us promote it. So that's just a testament to how
we've been working with Rumble on this. Yeah, we've had multiple meetings with Rumble on this to exclusively bring it to Rumble. So not only Yeah, to your point, not only are they going to allow it, they're promoting it. So you're right about that.
It's so interesting that we're all so programmed what we can and cannot say in the year 2023. Who would have thought we got here? But we say what we want on our newsletter. We want to tell you about that before we get started with the news. You can go on over to redacted.inc, sign up for a free daily newsletter. It is a summary of a lot of the stories that we talk about here with links to the original sources, plus more, because we do about 4 or 5 stories in the live show and more stories in the newsletter. For instance, today, in researching the Hunter Biden possible indictment, it was really hard to find those court filings. The mainstream media doesn't seem like they want you to see original links to those. They just want you to see their take on it. We don't feel like that. We want you to read for yourself, think for yourself. You don't always have to agree with our take on stories. Absolutely not. We're here to have a conversation, make sense of the world together. The world, it makes little sense, feels scary these days, but we have each other. So it feels better to have a community of people who are interested in making themselves educated, and that's what you can do. You can find at the Redacted newsletter. Again, it's free, so head on over and sign up at redacted.inc.
Well, the Biden administration this week saying there's nothing to see here, no problems. Bidenomics is absolutely working. Inflation is coming down. Janet Yellen recently saying the banking system is fine. Yet we're hitting $34 trillion in debt. We are now paying trillions of dollars just on the interest payments alone on the debt. How exactly is that sustainable? And is everything fine? Nothing to see here. Let's ask Peter Schiff. I've been wanting to get Peter on the show for a very, very long time. We reference him often. It's an honor to have Peter Schiff here, who is the senior economist at asset management at Euro Pacific Asset Management. Peter, great to have you here on the show finally.
Clayton, great to be here. And first of all, when Joe Biden is out there talking about how inflation is coming down, first of all, he needs to accept some responsibility for how much it went up, number one.
Right.
But number two, the main reason that we saw that big drop in headline CPI, where it got from 9% to 4%. And by the way, 9 wasn't 9, it was actually 18. If you measure inflation the way they measured it back in the 1970s, if you took the same CPI that was used back then and used it now, the actual price increases are double. So we didn't really go from 9 to 3. We went from 18 to 6. But the reason that happened was because we got a 50% drop in the price of oil. That's what really pulled down the headline number. And the reason that oil prices collapsed was because Biden decided to raid the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and he dumped oil on the market. That reserve is now at an all-time record low as far as how much supply. We have 20 days supply left. The absolute level of the crude in the reserve now is the lowest since in 40 years, even though our population is 50% higher than it was 40 years ago. So we've really tapped that out. Now that we're no longer dumping as much oil, the price is up 40% in the last 3 months or so. We're almost back at $90 a barrel. So all that progress is about to be reversed in the headline CPI. Meanwhile, the core, which excludes food and energy, never really came down. And now it's headed back up. So this myth that the inflation problem is over is wrong. It's just getting started.
That's the fear. I mean, so this is just getting started. People are thinking, well, we're heading into some good times now. I don't know where they're seeing the good times with mortgage, with interest rates where they are, with the demand for mortgages hitting a ridiculously low number. The Fed continuing to push this idea of printing more money. We're continuing to print more money. Now we're moving towards a central bank digital currency. I don't see how I don't know what they're talking about, that we are in a good period right now.
This is all spin, right? This is BS. This is what politicians do. But if you look at the actual facts, first of all, mortgages are now about 7.5%. They're going to go to 8% before the end of the year, probably. But by next year, they could be back at double digits. But they were down in the 3s. So home prices are completely unaffordable at this time based on where mortgage rates are. The only reason people could afford these high prices in the recent past, was because mortgage rates were so low. Credit card debt is at a record high, but credit card interest rates are also at a record high. People are paying more than 20% interest on their credit cards. So people are struggling with debt service, plus prices are rising. That's why so many people now are moonlighting. You have a record number of Americans who are holding down multiple full-time jobs, and you also have record numbers of Americans that have second jobs and third jobs. Why are Americans working so many jobs? It's because that's the only way they can pay the bills. People don't want to have 3 jobs. They want one job. But unfortunately, they can't get by on one job anymore, so they need to have all these other jobs. Meanwhile, Biden is bragging about all these jobs he's creating. People don't want these jobs. They'd rather not need them. We're creating jobs for people who already have jobs. But we still have an army of people who aren't even in the workforce because they're living off of a government check. And so the people who are paying taxes have to work that much harder so that the people who aren't working can continue to consume without producing.
And so inflation will continue to go up. I mean, for the average consumer right now, for the average person watching our show who is struggling to put food on the table, the bills for their average, thing of bananas, their food, their steaks that they're buying for their family, the food that they're trying to provide is now double, triple in costs. And to your point, the U.S. dollar has dropped dramatically in value, so they're having to get multiple jobs to cover this difference now. The rents have gone up, and they can't afford it. So what happens now to the average consumer? Where's the bottom?
Yeah, and the dollar is losing purchasing power here at home, but on international exchange markets, the dollar has still been strong relative to the euro or the yen or the pound. But of course, those currencies are also losing purchasing power because inflation is happening in those countries as well. Now, U.S. politicians try to say, you see, this proves it's not our fault because inflation is a global problem. No, all the politicians and the central bankers made the same mistakes. They all had interest rates down at zero. Europe even had them negative. Everybody was doing QE. That's why everybody is suffering from inflation. Inflation is the tax that we're paying to cover all of the government spending. But what I've been advising people to do for years is to stock up on food now, because why put your money in the bank where it's going to depreciate and earn no interest? Just think about the things you might buy next year or 2 years from now that won't go bad, and just buy them now. I mean, that's better than leaving your money in the bank. And by the way, all the banks in America are insolvent. The U.S. Federal Reserve is propping them up. We began what would have been a much worse financial crisis months ago when you had Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank and these other banks fail. The reason they failed was because they loaded up on government bonds and mortgages when interest rates were really low. And then when interest rates rose and depositors wanted their money back, the banks didn't have it because they had loaned it out to the government and on these mortgages, and the mortgages and government bonds lost value. And so the banks, were insolvent. And so the Fed bailed them out. But all the banks have done the same thing. I mean, think about years and years and years. All these Americans went out there and refinanced their mortgages at 3%, 3.5%. And now the banks own those mortgages, but their cost of money is now over 5%. When interest rates were zero, the banks were making a lot of money on those 3% mortgages. When interest rates are 5.5%, they're losing a fortune. So they're all bankrupt. And if the Fed continues to hike rates to keep fighting inflation, or even leaves rates where they are and doesn't cut them, all the big banks that we bailed out following the 2008 financial crisis, every one of them is going to fail.
Every one of them is going to fail. What does that mean
for all those big banks without the government bailing them out?
So where will people put their money? I mean, and I think if we've been talking about this for months on the show, especially after Silicon Valley Bank, it's, you go to get money. If you go to get money out of the bank doesn't have your money in the first place. I mean, it's a joke that the bank is
it's
actually
all loaned out.
Yeah, it's all loaned out. So what are people going to do with their money if they have some savings? Or would you advise people to take out what cash they can now and store it locally, turn it to gold? What would you do? Buy food?
Well, yeah, there's no reason to leave your money in a bank. I mean, at a minimum, you should pull it out and put it in a money market fund somewhere because you can earn over 5%. The banks can't afford to pay you because they're losing too much money. And that's also a problem for banks because everybody wants to take out their money. And so their whole businesses are imploding. But it doesn't make any sense to leave money in a bank for other reasons, because number one, inflation is going to erode away the value of whatever you leave there.
Right.
And you have two possibilities. Your bank is going to fail and you might lose the money, even if it's insured by the FDIC. The FDIC is broke.
Right.
And so it's possible that all these banks fail and there's no bailouts because the FDIC is bankrupt. So either your bank fails and you could lose your money, or your bank doesn't fail because the Fed bails everybody out by printing money. But in that case, the value of your deposits collapse. And so you lose to inflation. So either way, you're guaranteed to lose if you keep your money in the bank. So why not pull it out, at least the money you don't need for short term to pay your bills, and then do something else with it. One thing you can do is buy gold and silver. And then what I do with most of my clients is I manage their portfolios, because we don't keep all of our money in gold and silver because they don't generate any income. I like to buy dividend-paying stocks outside the United States, where the stocks are paying dividends of 6, 7, 8, 9%, where these dividends are derived by selling goods and services around the world that consumers need, not the ones they're going to give up because they don't have any money anymore, but the stuff that they have to buy, no matter what the price is. Maybe they'll buy a little less, but they have to buy it. There are some things that are discretionary that you don't need, that you only buy those things after you pay for your food, after you pay for your energy and your rent and your insurance. So we don't kind of invest in those businesses because they're in a lot of trouble, because the consumer's in a lot of trouble. So you got to buy value. You got to get out of the U.S. You got to be thinking about inflation. Inflation is a tax, right? It's how the government funds the deficits. All this stuff that Obama is promising the voters, it all costs something. And if he's not going to raise taxes, he's going to raise inflation. And so every time you go to the supermarket and prices are so much higher than when you were there before, that difference is actually a tax. That's how we're paying for this. So when Biden says that, well, we're not going to tax anybody who makes under $400,000, that's a lie, because almost everything he's spending is being paid for by the people who make under $400,000, because they are disproportionately impacted by the inflation tax, because they spend almost everything they earn and then some, so they hit that tax. But if you're an investor and you don't want to pay the inflation tax, you got to get out of the thing that's being taxed, which are your U.S. dollars, your U.S. Treasury bonds, your municipal bonds, your corporate bonds. Anything that's dollar denominated is subject to the U.S. inflation tax. So I want to avoid that tax by avoiding U.S. dollar assets, and that's what we're helping our clients do, at Europe Pacific Asset Management.
I'll get you out of here on this, Peter, which is where inflation goes over the next 6 months, a year from now to 2 years. Where do you see the long road of inflation going? Maybe a number projection and what people might expect in this economy.
Well, it's got no place to go but up. And first of all, you have to understand what inflation is. Inflation is an expansion of the money supply. That's literally what's being inflated. That's where the word comes from. Inflate means to expand. So what are you expanding? Because you don't expand a price. Prices go up, they go down, but they don't expand. It's the money supply that expands. And if you get an old dictionary, a Webster's dictionary, and you look up the word inflation, it will say an expansion of the money supply. That's what it is. Now, what happens when you expand the money supply is that prices go up. So rising prices result from inflation. They are not inflation. They do not cause inflation. They are caused by inflation. Now, who expands the money supply? The Federal Reserve. Why does it do that? To finance government debt. So it's government deficits that are the drivers behind inflation. Now, the deficits right now are over $2 trillion a year. We've never had anything like that outside of a recession. In fact, even in normal recessions, we don't have deficits this high. We're running $2 trillion deficits. They're going to be $3 trillion by this time next year, even if we don't have a recession. But if we do have a recession, which is more likely, these deficits are going to rise to $5 trillion a year. Where's that money going to come from? It's all going to be printed by the Fed. Inflation is going to get so much worse because it's the only politically expedient way out, because otherwise they have to slash spending. They're going to have to cut Medicare, cut Social Security, cut defense, cut government pensions, massive cuts to spending. None of these politicians want to do that. They also don't want to pass huge middle-class tax hikes. They don't want to impose a national sales tax. They don't want to raise the payroll tax. So the only way they can get away with this is by raising the inflation tax. So they're going to print way more money, and that means prices are going to go up even faster. And the reason that the politicians like to lie and pretend that inflation is rising prices is because they want to blame somebody else for the inflation. So when oil prices go up, they can blame Putin, or they can blame OPEC, or they can blame greedy businesses that are gouging their customers. But if they properly define inflation as an increase in the money supply, they can't blame anybody but themselves, because Putin doesn't increase our money supply. Some U.S. corporation can't increase our money supply. Only we can do that. So inflation is homegrown, and the rest of the world is simply reacting to the inflation that we export.
Troubled times ahead, absolutely the case. And I'm glad to hear what you've been saying about this and how people can protect themselves. We've been trying to echo a lot of these same pieces of advice here on the show for many, many months. Peter Schiff, thank you so much. It's been a long time. Glad to have you. Hope you won't be a stranger, and we hope that you're able to come on the show more regularly.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Clayton. Anytime. Happy to be a guest.
And thanks so much, Peter. I mean, so bottom line, right now, inflation is going to continue to be hot. That means the cost of things is going to continue to go up.
Mm-hmm.
So we're already seeing gas prices at $90 right now for a barrel. Could hit about $100. Let me know in the chat right now where you guys are watching us from. How much are you paying for gas right now? I'm just asking my mom. Go ahead.
Here in southern Washington, like the Portland metro area, we have some of the highest in the nation at like it was like $5.30.
Whoa. Oh my gosh.
Jeez.
For 1 gallon.
Yeah.
That's
and
amazing.
It's cost me about $100 to fill my tank right now.
Jeez. And if you think about, well, what he said too, we covered this a few weeks ago here on the show, but now we're getting more data about this idea that just to cover the debt, the interest payments on the United States government's debt, $1 trillion.
Yeah.
Just the interest payments alone is unbelievable. So how is it sustainable? How are they going to get us out of this? And the only way they can get us out of it, is, to his point, is to continue to inflate the money supply in order to devalue the currency. So the writing is on the wall for the U.S. dollar. And now you're seeing this in expanded BRICS, these expanded BRICS nations, and having a currency that's backed by tangible assets like gold and silver and commodities like oil and natural gas and things. Someone in the chat earlier asked, hey, Clayton, like, how can I convert British pounds into tangible assets?
Well, we're going to talk to Carol Roth about that coming up because in her book, she talks about owning things such as land, precious metals, things that you understand, right? Holding on to things. And it seems like this is the economy that we're looking for.
Yeah, because they want you to own nothing. They want you to own nothing.
And another thing that, I do every day is I use XE.com and they're not a sponsor of the show, but I get daily alerts for currencies around the world and where the US dollar can buy, euro, metals, whatever it is, start just tracking those things so that you know the value of your dollar or your pound or your euro, because these things will take you by surprise and you'll be like, oh, we're not the global power. How come this, it's just good to know what are the general exchange rates. For instance, today, $1 buys about 0.9493 euro. So these are things that just it's time to know this stuff.
And we don't have financial education in the United States at all. They don't want you to know it. They don't teach it to you at all. Let me know in the chat, how many of you were taught the difference between assets and liabilities in high school? All I learned in high school was how to balance a checkbook. That was the only class that I had. I was once talking to Bill Hemmer, one of my co-hosts years ago at Fox News, and he pulled me aside in the hallway, and we were talking about this on the air, and he said, I never learned any of this. He said they never taught any of this to us in school, financial education. And so they want to keep people dumb. They want to keep you not knowing this stuff. Go ahead, David.
I was going to say, I took a class in high school called home economics.
Yeah.
And we learned how to make Care Bears. We learned how to sew. We learned how to make
Care
food.
Bears.
Yeah.
We literally made Care Bears, like our own Care Bear. I made a Ghostbuster bear with the Ghostbuster logo on it.
I made a pillow in home ec.
I learned in home
I made blueberry muffins.
And I also learned how to cook. And so I actually loved that class. It was a group of us guys against the girls, and we crushed them in cooking.
We learned nothing about the economy or economics. Nothing.
No, nothing about finance at all. It's really sad. And this is how they keep you. This is how they keep you stupid about the money supply and about the economic system.
There are so many ways. This is just one of many. We're going to talk to Carol Roth again about student loans, about ESGs, about all kinds of ways that the government is just working against us. Specifically, these governments that call themselves capitalistic, it's all right for some, and they want to sort of sweep the rug under from everybody else. And so we will talk about that. But while we're talking about home economics, it's a good time to talk about HelloFresh because it's fall. Kids are back to school. Now is the time to revamp your meal planning. A good way to do that is with HelloFresh because you get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. You can skip trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. So, when you're going through your week and you're thinking, okay, which day is what? How are we going to, get this or that? This is a great time to make sure that you've got HelloFresh in your meal planning because they include 40 recipes and over 100 add-on items to choose from every week. Ever wish that you can spend less time planning, shopping, and cooking for the family? This is how, because you choose the meals, you get all the ingredients, takes the guesswork out of it. HelloFresh is more than just dinners. You can also stock your fridge with easy breakfasts, quick lunches, and fresh snacks. Just shop HelloFresh Market and add any of these tasty, time-saving solutions to your weekly box. Another awesome tip is that if you say are a family of 4, you can order meals for more than that amount and then save them for your kids' lunches the next day. They could take it to school. That's another, pro tip from one busy meal planning mom to another. So go to HelloFresh.com/50redacted and use code 50redacted. And with that, you'll get 50% off plus 15% off the next 2 months as well. So you'll get 50% off that order you make and 15% off for the next 2 months. So again, that's HelloFresh.com/50redacted. Use code 50redacted for 50% off. That is HelloFresh. They are America's #1 meal kit.
Grover is excited about it. What the hell he's doing? That's our little mini pincher. I don't know what's going on down there, but he should know to be quiet during showtime. But for some reason, he's a little riled up right now. So we apologize. Someone in the chat just said learned about economics in college a little bit, but that's about it. That's a little bit. That's about it. Just so some economics in college, but not much else.
Yeah, I never had to. Like in college, I never took any economics. I've never taken an economics class in my life. I've never had to. It's never been offered. I mean, I guess I could have. I guess I could have majored in economics, but I didn't. So as a biology major.
Something that Carol Roth talks about in her book about, we charge these high fees for education, and a lot of things that is in these high fees is increasingly administrative costs because these colleges now feel like they need a diversity director or what have you. So the increasing costs of college actually don't cover increasing salaries for professors. It's usually bloated administration.
Yeah.
And so, you're not really getting an education or even a better one than before. You're getting accreditation. But most of these schools put their programming online. So if you want to educate yourself, you absolutely can. It's available to everyone. So, this is something that you can easily do if you want to pick up books, but we were not pointed in that direction. So anyway.
Not at all. All right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this. Voting starts tomorrow in Donetsk, and these are the first elections in what is now considered Russia, and the elections will go through Sunday. And, of course, this was formerly eastern Ukraine, and in Donetsk and Luhansk and Zaporozhye, and all of that entire region. Of course, we show you the map on a regular basis. That entire area, of course, voted overwhelmingly to become part of Russia, and they are going to have elections for the very first time as Russia going through Sunday. So, of course, Russia absolutely would want to bomb their own people right before an election, right? Makes a lot of sense. Like, these people just voted to become part of your country, so let's bomb them. Russia would love to do that, right? Well, that's what the dipshits in the Western media would have you believe. Just as Antony Blinken shows up, touches down in the capital of Ukraine, a missile destroys a Russian market with people going about their day, buying goods and going shopping in Russia. A missile hits. Watch. Yeah. 17 people killed. More than 30 people hurt. All of the Western media immediately blamed it on Russia. Just take a look. Here's just some headlines here. These are YouTube videos. Look at these idiots. CCTV captures the moment Russian missile strikes market in Donetsk. Deadly Russian missile hits Ukrainian city. Russian attacks crowded Ukraine. All of these, that's just one example. Here's the Associated Press. Russian missile strikes Ukrainian market. Well, it's not a Ukrainian, it's a Russian market. Kills 17 people as Blinken announces a new $1 billion aid package. Oh, the timing is amazing, isn't it? Russian strike on crowded Ukraine market leaves 17 dead. Russian strike on it. But you're not stupid. You people who watch this show are not stupid. You know exactly where this came from. In fact, a frame-by-frame analysis, eyewitness reports, and even Ukrainian journalists are now admitting that, no, this came from Ukraine. So, yeah, way to get out that story there, Western media, and jump the gun on this. In fact, this afternoon, a pro-Ukrainian news outlet, conflict intelligence team, admits that it analyzed missile trajectory and confirmed it flew from the northwest, which is Ukrainian-controlled territory. Witnesses also, you can see in the video and in a frame-by-frame analysis, were looking up in the direction of Ukraine where this was coming from Ukrainian-controlled territory where it was fired. Also, this town is Russia. So we sent journalist Patrick Lancaster to Donetsk today, just hours before voting is set to take place tomorrow, to interview the witnesses who watched these attacks unfold. Watch.
I'm Patrick Lancaster. This is a special update from Donetsk for Redacted. Right now we're in the Kievsky district of Donetsk, and there has been an attack here today. We see some shrapnel pieces here on the ground. It's been about an hour and a half since this attack happened, and we can hear shelling still right now. But there's several attacks across Donetsk today. Report of a few people injured. We're going to be seeing what we can here on the ground, but now we see some shrapnel, and we're going to bring you as much as we can. Здравствуйте. Можно? Что произошло?
Град прилетел.
Да? Когда это было?
Пару часов назад.
Ага. Откуда?
С Авдеевки, откуда? Он полдома снесло, и вот он упал.
Ага. И девка это украинская страна, да?
Конечно.
Ага. И как вы думал, почему украинский стреляет здесь, на твоем доме?
Я не знаю почему. Вот 15 июня через 10 метров вот сюда упал за этот забор. 10 метров расстояния. Они стреляют в одни и те же точки.
Ага. Военный объект здесь?
Какой военный объект? Здесь все жилые дома. Это, здесь дети живут, в подвалах. Какие военные объекты? Здесь вообще никого нет.
Ага. Какой адрес?
Куинджи 2Б. Улица
Ага.
Куинджи 2Б.
Как зовут?
Николай.
Все, извините. Принцип, это страна туда и просто попал,
Вот.
да?
Вот так до аэропорта, вот так вот, 2,5 километра.
Ага.
До
И на
аэропорта
другой
Заречного.
стороне
А
Авдеевка,
на той
да?
стороне, да, до Водина 4,5 километра. Близко живем.
Ага. Вопрос, как вас жить, как это? Вы только 10 минут, мы слышали много обстрелов. Как жить, как это?
Страшно жить. Привыкать, 9 лет уже так живем.
Это каждый день?
Да.
Да.
I'd just like to know, what do you have to say to the people in the West that are paying and supplying these weapons to bomb you?
Что вы могу сказать люди на Западе, которые...
Пусть stop weapons to Ukraine.
I mean, look at them. Do they look like military targets? They look like normal people, like anywhere in the world. They even dress like Australian.
Only children live there. No military there.
Mm-hmm. I still haven't. I've been here 1 month. I still haven't seen a military target. You know, personally. Thank you very much. God bless.
Да, слава Богу.
Yeah.
Все под Богом ходят.
Можем мы видеть твою крышу?
Пойдем. Свет включать не буду.
Хорошо.
Show your head.
Взрыв был там, взрыв был на крыше.
Он зацепил крышу и потом в забор. Один враг летел.
One second. О. О. Что это был горел сегодня, да?
Сегодня 3 машины пожарная приезжала, тушила. Пацаны, красавцы, МЧС, наша 4. Красавцы. Вон Авдеевка, вон там. Вот он, как он летел. Все четко, понятно. Откуда. Говорю, вот там Авдеевка, а здесь жилые дома. Это поселок Третий Восточный. Здесь нет военных объектов, ну никаких абсолютно. Здесь люди, вот.
All right, so we're showing you what we can here, and you see how this just the day before the Russian election start for the first time here in Donetsk. And of course, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson, the other regions that by Russian law is considered part of Russia. Regardless of what Ukraine and the West says, by Russian law, these regions are considered part of Russia. And every day there has been civilians injured here in Donetsk and Lugansk and the other regions. Just yesterday, here in the city of Donetsk, there was a reported 10 civilians injured, 1 killed, and many homes and apartments damaged. We're just here today. I just got back to Donetsk this morning, and we're here showing you what we can here on the ground. So we're going to move forward and keep bringing you all of the important news here on the ground in Donetsk and beyond. And of course, we're going to be showing you what's going on with the first Russian elections here in Donetsk. So this has been a special update for Redacted. We're moving on.
All right, thanks, Patrick. So there you go. So elections starting tomorrow. We will be covering it here on the show and see what happens there. But the timing is amazing. Anthony Blinken arrives. They launch what by all accounts could have been HIMARS attacks right into these areas to try to drum up support, paint it as a Russian attack, or use these false flag attacks in order to get more money, to get more weapons, and to continue. It wasn't enough that he had to walk through graveyards. We need to do this too, and attack these civilians. Go ahead, Phil.
Well, that's how you win the hearts and minds of the people that you want to come back to your country, right? Is you bomb them. I mean, that's like, right. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, it's awful. Well, we have more news to get to. Now that we've seen that, it's hard to shake off the image of that man saying, "Children live here. Don't send them any more weapons. We don't want to live like this."
He's making a plea to the West because the Western media won't cover it.
Right.
He's telling Anthony Blinken's there, please stop sending weapons. This is what it's doing. It's killing people.
No more weapons to Ukraine, he says. And this is the area that's being bombed. So anyhow, well, we're going to talk to you about globalist plans. We're going to talk to Carol Roth about her new book, You Will Own Nothing, plus updated story about how New Zealand taxpayers are funding a project to grow fruit, lab-grown fruit. You've heard about lab-grown meat. This is the next iteration of that. Do we need that? And especially in New Zealand, where they have lots of naturally growing fruit, do they need that? Why are they doing that? We're going to talk about that in a second. But first,
yes, we've got more news to get to in a second. But first, I want to tell you about our friends at Lear Capital, because as many as you know, from time to time, I bring on our friend Kevin Demerit, the founder of Lear Capital, to show you the valuable insight that he has as to what's happening in our global economies right now. And recently, Kevin provided insight onto why so many countries led by the BRICS nations plan to move out from the U.S. dollar, create a gold-backed currency, and what that could mean to the value of your savings and retirement account. I strongly recommend that you call Lear Capital, go to LearRedacted.com and get a free copy of what they're calling the Tipping Point Report. It's a totally free report that'll help explain to you and how to protect your retirement and savings account with gold and silver. And of course, we're also big fans of real estate. So gold, silver, real estate. And it's just a piece of education material for you guys to check out. So it's absolutely great. It's only a matter of time until we're forced to use digital currency. So you need to get educated quickly to preserve the wealth that you already have. For the past few years, Natalie and I have been moving away from the US dollar and into hard assets like gold and silver and real estate. And we see the writing on the wall, and we need to protect ourselves and our family before it's too late. We were just talking to our mother-in-law at dinner tonight, and she said she just bought a whole bunch of silver as well. And because we see what's happening with the U.S. dollar, you know, we're not like looking for gold and silver to go up in price in large amounts, but it's a wealth preservation mechanism to protect yourself against inflation. Because if you got your money, you know, in a bank right now, in a savings account, it's losing value every day that it's in there. Bottom line. So call Lear Capital today. Request their special report. It's called The Tipping Point. It's free information about the dollar, the economy, and what it could mean for your savings and retirement. Make sure you go to LearRedacted.com or call the 800 number, which is 1-800-613-3557. This report will open your eyes to what's coming. Again, the number is 1-800-613-3557. Go to LearRedacted.com.
Well, does it seem to you like our lives are pawns in a game of politics? It sure seems that way to me, especially when you get gas, when you pay bills, when you buy things at the grocery store, inflation, high interest rates, increasingly draconian rules in our social contract with our government. That is the theme of Carol Roth's new book, You Will Own Nothing, because she says this is intentional. Because all of this hands power to global elites. She has a lot to say on all of this, and she joins us to ring in. Thank you so much for joining us.
Always great to be with you, Natalie.
So I finished the book last week. Now I'm a fan of your books, having read two. Your first book, The War on Small Business,
Actually,
I cannot recommend.
Second book.
Oh, okay. First book that I read. Sorry. I guess I have to catch up. Okay. I'm one behind. The War on Small Business, I thought, made an amazing case for how the government chose winners and losers during the pandemic, not based on science. One of the major cases you make in your book is that if you own nothing, they own you. Can you explain this? Because I think it's something we all should sort of crochet on a pillow and remind ourselves all the time so that we don't eventually live in the Hunger Games.
Sure. So, for people who aren't familiar with my background, I am a recovering investment banker. I've been commentating on markets for a very long time. I've been advocating for wealth creation opportunities for more than a quarter of a century. And so there's one thing I know above all else is that if you want to create wealth, you have to have ownership. Wealth comes from owning assets in particular that can store value or hopefully appreciate in value. That is how you gain wealth. It's not just from working, it's making sure that you have this ownership. And you can go throughout history, and while they tell you might be quote unquote happy if you don't own anything, we can see that throughout history, the people who don't have ownership have been very unfree. They have been very unhappy. In many cases, they have starved to death or lost their lives. And so being able to have property and not only the wealth creation opportunities that come with it, but the sovereignty. If you own your house, you can do whatever you want to do, within legal limits. Obviously can't infringe on other people's rights, but, within those parameters within your house. If you are renting from a corporate landlord, they get to dictate the terms by which you get to live. And the same goes on and on. If you don't have access to a car, you don't have that level of freedom. You are dependent on other people for your freedoms. And so it really, is a mechanism to have ownership of you if you don't have the freedom and that personal sovereignty.
Now, you have a whole chapter against CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies. You really emphasize owning real things, for instance, precious metals, because those have stood the test of time. Things that you can trade for real things. And so this idea of central bank digital currency. What are some of the reasons you don't like it? And then you say we don't need it.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously having your wealth in a form factor that you can control, I think is very important for people to be thinking about, as we have seen the incredible manipulations that have gone on with currency, with the economy, and with sort of everything else in our lives. For people who aren't familiar with a central bank digital currency, that is a currency in a digital format that is issued by a central bank and or its corresponding government. And the unique factor of it is that it is fully centralized and completely transparent to them. And because it's digital, it has features like programmability and the ability to expire should the people who are putting it out into the world decide they want to do that. So it's not that the central banks don't have any control over our money. It's not that governments don't have any control over our money, because unfortunately they do. And the more that you leave it, in that fiat currency that they control, the more subject you are to that level of control. But the concept of a central bank digital currency, that they can see every single transaction, down to the dollar level, that digital dollar level, is absolutely frightening, because whether it's under the guise of, hey, we need to control inflation, so instead of enacting monetary policy to change interest rates and the like, we're just going to shut off access to people's money. That could be one way that goes about. Another one is, well, we think that cows are bad for the environment. And so, we're trying to be more green, and you've had too many burgers this month. So I'm sorry, Carol, you can't have that burger that you're trying to buy at McDonald's or whatever it is. And then even worse, as we've seen, the policing of speech on social platforms and the deplatforming of people across the world. Maybe we're having this conversation, Natalie, they don't like what we're talking about. So, on a respective basis, the central banks and governments behind those digital currencies say, sorry, guys, you can't have access to that. And so that really does give up your freedom if you are not able to transact, if you're not able to have a store of wealth and value and your ability to access what you have earned. This is money that you have gone out, put out your blood, sweat, and tears, or taken on risk to earn. And they are now going to come into the middle of that and say, no, we're going to control that next level of how you exchange and how you gain wealth. I mean, that would be the absolute, the ultimate in financial tyranny and the absolute end of freedom. And so it's not one of those things that's hypothetical. I mean, that's what people need to understand.
No, we saw it in Canada during the trucker convoy. Yeah, we don't like what you're doing, so we're taking your bank accounts.
And more than that, just in terms of the CBDC itself, they've run pilot programs. The G7 put out their principles for retail-facing CBDCs. These aren't actions that you take on something that isn't being seriously considered, which is why we need to raise that red flag now and make sure that people stand up and do everything they can to prevent it if it's put in place, to not use it and not to be lured into the system, because they're going to put out that carrot to try to get people to convert over.
Right. Now, one of the things that you say is a big problem with the U.S. government is their inability to be a responsible host, I guess, of global currency, and that economists warned about this with what's called the Triffin dilemma. That's fascinating, because maybe it shows how hard it would have been for any country. We don't have to feel so bad because this dilemma exists, right? It was always going to exist. France might have done the same thing. So can you explain how hard it is for the United States to both be looking out for the world and ourselves, how it's almost impossible, and where it's leading us?
Well, so there are a couple things that are true. One is that holding the global reserve currency is not something that has happened on a forever basis. The United States has been in that position for about 80 years, but before the United States, it was the British, and before the British, it was the Dutch. So this is something that changes due to historical cycles, geopolitical cycles, but usually because the cycle within a country country gets to the point where that particular country takes on too much debt, allows their military to deteriorate, has infighting, and does all those things that implodes from the inside versus the outside. The Triffin dilemma comes from Robert Triffin, who is a noted economist. And as you said, the conflict when you have the global reserve currency is that you have that as your country's currency, but everybody else is using it. So you're trying to keep, in our case, the US dollar stable for the domestic economy in the world. Now, you want to give them a pass and say, oh, that's very difficult. So, maybe they're slogging through. But the dilemma is one versus the other. What the Fed and the U.S. government has done is neither. They have not kept the U.S. dollar stable for the domestic economy in the terms of the U.S. dollar does not buy the same thing at the grocery store that it did a couple years ago or 40 years ago or go back in time. So they haven't done a good job in maintaining that stability domestically. And they also have not done a good job of doing that on the international stage. So instead of favoring one over the other, they have amazingly managed to do neither. And I think that is where we can ding them as being, derelict in terms of their duty to maintain the stability of the currency. And I mean, you can see in terms of having 15 years of massive central bank interference in the markets, 9 years of zero interest rate policy and the delta, making up very close to zero interest rate policy. I mean, that's just absolutely obscene. In the US, our public debt to GDP is around 120% right now. That's an emerging market balance sheet backed by the world's reserve currency that has kept us from having a traditional currency crisis. So, I think it's very easy for them to be criticized for absolutely mismanaging and stepping away from their responsibilities and just doing a huge, horrible job that's transferred wealth from Main Street to Wall Street. Even though we know it's a difficult thing for them to do what they need to do, they still have managed to mess up the cornerstone of what they could control.
Okay, so they get an F on both accounts, and
unfortunately,
yes, okay, I don't feel better about that dilemma.
And unfortunately, we do on the other side of it. We get an F because they get an F.
Right. I mean, your entire bit about Social Security as a Ponzi scheme is interesting because that's how it's going to affect us, because our leaders are borrowing from us, basically, in a way that is not protected. We don't know if we're ever going to see that again. I think it's really fascinating, your chapter about student loans. You say that this is a ploy to keep young people from building wealth from the get-go and be stuck with a lifetime of debt. Can you speak to this and explain how this is a common lie that we all accept that all education is good and worth it, and the more the better, and how this keeps young people from building wealth in a way that no previous generation has had?
Yeah, so the way that we look at education is very strange. So in many respects, education is priceless, and you should be a lifelong learner, and you should strive to continue to educate yourself. And it does, when you make the investment in yourself, have a payoff depending on what you pay for it. In the United States in particular, what college has become is not necessarily about education, it's become about accreditation. And the reason people are going is not to be well-rounded in the classics and to be a person of the world. They are going because they think it's going to translate into more money and a more successful career for them. So that is an investment. And if you're going to make an investment, people should know that investments are not valuable at any price. If you overpay for the investment, you're never going to get a return on it. You may get a negative return. You could end up going bankrupt and the like. And so the same thing goes, with the education system. And what we've had happen in the United States is absolutely disgusting. We have had the U.S. government nationalize a large part of the student lending business, and they have become the largest predatory lender in the country. They are transferring wealth from teenagers, in many cases, and very young people to colleges and their administrators. And they're doing this because there is no underwriting process. There is no differentiation based on what kind of education you're getting. And on the back end, because there's no underwriting, there is no bankruptcy process. So basically, young people who don't have the tools, which again, is shameful since that we have government-run education, but they don't have the tools today to evaluate a return on investment in terms of what they're making with the education, are saddled with 5, in some cases 6-figure loans that are never going to pay off for many of them for the kinds of degrees they're getting. There are certainly exceptions to the rule. Maybe if you go into high finance or engineering or whatnot, certain high earning careers, and also depending on where you go. If you're going to an Ivy League school versus a state school, or if you're going to, maybe a smaller school where you're not taking on as much money, there are some variations. But what we've seen overall is that college has grown. I think it's 5 times the GDP and 8 times wages in terms of their cost to their outcome. So it's not like we can make the argument that, the increased cost of college, well, that's returning more money in terms of the GDP, or it's boosting wages. It's not. It's far outpacing that, far outpacing inflation. It's just been a wholesale wealth transfer. And the idea that you go to some mediocre school and for 4 years it costs $320,000 and you're going to get a $60,000 job at the end of that math doesn't make sense in any universe. So we have a huge problem that needs to be undone and readdressed, because when you then have that coming out into the workforce, your balance sheet is wrecked. How are you going to be able to buy a house and start a life and do those things to make sure that you do have that ownership? That was, by the way, the whole purpose of you going to college to begin with.
Right. Yeah, you had this shocking statistic about how college has become so much more expensive, but they're not investing in professors. No. They're investing in administrators
Correct.
That are doing things like diversity programs. So that's what kids are paying more for, not necessarily a better education. There are so many other great chapters in Carol's book. For instance, you take the piss out of ESGs. We've done that on the show too. A lot of context about devaluing the US dollar. And yet this is not a partisan book. It's not one party's fault over the other. This is for all of us to get involved and solve. So I highly recommend the book. I want to say thank you for joining us to talk about it, and come back another time, because it seems like our economy is not going to get better unless we all do something together.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And we have to empower ourselves with the knowledge, because the elite may want you to own nothing, but I want you to own everything, Natalie. So we have to turn this around.
Great. All right. We sure will. One YouTube channel at a time.
That's right.
All right. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks. Have a great one.
So, and that's great because, thank you, Carol. That's great because, for people that like to buy things, and
who now?
People who like to buy video games and who like to buy.
You have to. I don't
David
think she means consumer goods.
Oh, okay, but
that's
an
means
investment.
Assets.
It is an asset.
Those are liabilities.
When I buy things for the studio that are, I buy cable, buy HDMI plugs. David and I are in the same camp where we have to, got to keep it going.
Okay.
We definitely are.
I think by she meant I want you to own everything. She didn't mean me. She meant the collective you.
Yeah.
Right.
I had a friend who told me his wife hates when he says he's going to have a conversation with me because every time he talks to me, he spends money.
Yeah. Oh, geez.
All right, we've got more news to get to here. We're going to talk about Bill Gates and lab-grown fruit. Bill Gates, that produce coating chemical that he's created. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about what's going on in Canada, because the Freedom Convoy. It's been about a year and a half since the Freedom Convoy, the truckers in Canada, inspired everyone. And David Creighton has been at the trial for Tamara Litch, who is there, as well as Chris Barber, who are now they could face jail time for being involved, of course, in the trucker convoy. And that trial has started, and we're going to bring you an update on what is happening in Ottawa, Canada, around the trucker convoy.
All right, but first, how is this for a dystopic future? You could soon be eating lab-grown fruit as a side to your lab-grown meat, and said fruit could be sprayed with Bill Gates' produce coating chemical on it. So there are two things here that we're going to tell you about. One, that lab-grown fruit is a thing, doesn't roll off the tongue. Lab-grown fruit.
Doesn't grow off the tongue.
Doesn't roll off the tongue. You try saying it.
Bill Gates.
Lab-grown fruit.
Lab-grown fruit.
Hot on the heels of lab-grown meat.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Clayton still has trouble with emergency use authorization.
Yes,
I can't say that.
and
Emergency
you have trouble
use-
with nuclear.
We all have our. Let us know in the chat room. Hey, none of us are perfect. Let us know in the chat room. Is there a phrase that you screw up on a regular basis? Because yes, emergency use authorization. Unless I take it very, very slowly, I can't say it. That's fine.
All right. Well, I'm going to struggle through this one about lab-grown fruit.
Yeah, Bill
It shouldn't be a thing.
Bill
That's not
Gates'
my fault.
lab-grown fruit.
Okay. Well, Bill Gates, these two things could go hand in hand. We want to let you know that he has a company called Appeal that they say can make produce last for longer. It's a product that you spray on your produce, and it acts like a plastic coating. But then you eat it. You don't scrub it off. They say it's totally safe. Of course they do. Here is CNBC giving them this free commercial. I'm going to just let it play for a little bit. You'll get the idea, and then I'm going to stop it. But watch for a second, see what you think.
How long will that avocado?
Okay. So he then goes on to say, yeah, like an avocado can last weeks. Avocados don't
Anyway,
get me
this
started.
is a CNBC basically like a commercial for Bill Gates. They love having Bill Gates on their air on a regular basis. Anytime they get a chance to have him on and interview him,
I
let's
appreciate you stopping me on the tangent about avocados. Too,
Yeah.
because you know that where I was going. Okay, so yes, food spoilage is bad, and it's estimated that 30% of the world's food gets thrown away. But is the solution to spray a chemical on your fruit? And what is it that we're agreeing to spray on our produce? It's basically seed oils. Look, this is from the website of Appeal. They're saying that it's plant-based material. Now, I guess because we all go crazy for the word plant-based these days, they think that that's kind of okay. They say it's purified mono and diglycerides derived from sustainably sourced non-GMO plant oils. So basically it's vegetable. It's like a Crisco or, sunflower oil or safflower oil or whatever it is. If you look at how it's processed, they're saying, well, because it's so highly processed, we remove allergens, we remove other impurities, we remove trans fats. So there's no trans fats. Okay. But I think nutritionists universally agree that seed oils are a terrible thing, that we should not be eating. That's one of the reasons that even nutritionists say don't eat those Beyond Meat or Impossible Burger or what have you, because they are laden with seed oil. Seed oils is the new trans fat, the thing that nobody wants to eat. So will you take a healthy piece of produce and spray it with seed oils? I don't want to do that. I'd rather just buy my food in a more timely manner. But yes, I agree that food spoilage is a problem. I don't agree that this is a viable solution. Plus, they say that, they are going to grow their own seed oils. So this is going to lead to deforestation. Look at what they say here. How do you source these material? Well, we farm it. So they're going to clear out farmland and grow seed oils. In fact, seed oils is responsible for more deforestation than most livestock farming. We've shown you those data before. And so you're going to deforest more, grow more things in order to put on the things you've already grown. That seems pretty wasteful, don't you think?
Yeah, and then Bill Gates wants to cut down all of these trees like he announced, this new plan. So we're going to deforest everything so we can plant more stuff.
So we can plant things for more seed oils so that you can eat imitation meat burgers and spray this stuff on your otherwise unspoiled. We're going to bastardize
how
your
do those
fruit,
two things go
basically.
together? Like all these environmentalists who are like, hey, go out and plant a tree. Go plant a tree this weekend. Go out with a team of people, and this whole hillside has been ravaged by a wildfire. Go plant a tree. And then Bill Gates wants to come and tear them all down so he can plant stuff to make seed oils with.
So you'll have a double down diet of seed oils because he doesn't want you to eat meat. So you're eating a patty that's stuffed with seed oils. The bun usually has seed oils. There's seed oils in your condiments. And then you're produce side, whether if it's salad or tomatoes or what have you, are going to also be sprayed with a coating of seed oils to make them last longer. I want nothing to do with this. You decide how you feel about it. This is not my nutritional philosophy in life. But if CNBC is giving a commercial without any tough questions, why should we definitely should take this as a sign that globalists like it. And they want this for our food source. And soon we'll be able to have a side dish or a fruit salad of lab-grown fruit or fruit adjacent is what I want to call it. Because they're saying they're not actually going to duplicate fruit. They're going to make things that they've grown that are fruit-like. We already have that. We have fruit roll-ups. Have you ever had a fruit roll-up?
That's fruit adjacent.
Yeah.
We saw, the other day we were at a market and there was like some food that was shaped like a fruit. Like, have you guys ever had, what is the candy that has the bananas in it? Runts. Did you guys ever eat runts as a kid?
That's not fruit adjacent.
My friend Ben and I used to go to the arcade. We'd go to the candy store. We'd buy runts, and I used to love the banana ones.
You're so weird. Nobody eats the banana runts.
I always thought, I love those.
They do.
I did.
I thought they were bananas.
There's actually I've seen the little quarter op machines, the little candy dispenser machines that are just filled with banana runts, and those are the absolute best machines on. Yeah.
Where is that machine?
You're blowing my mind.
I want that machine.
I would
You need one in the
sort those out and get rid of them.
This is kind of like the fake fruit. It seems like the same thing, like a fake fruit, like that. We're gonna start.
I'm gonna say
square apples and round bananas.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say I would rather eat runts and fruit roll-ups than this lab-grown fruit. And we're going to get to that in a second because scientists in New Zealand are now working to grow fruit tissue from plant cells that they hope will be just as tasty as fruit from a tree. This is from a company called Plant and Food Research, and they are government-owned and funded. So basically, this is their promo video that's on their website here. I'm going to just let you see that they think that oh, look at us. We're growing fruit in a petri dish. This is so awesome. So basically, the entire country of New Zealand is funding lab-grown fruit projects. And in fact...
Wait.
Yeah?
I was going to say, wait until we get the gain-of-function fruit, right?
Gain-of-function fruit. I guess because they're showing us fish that they're also looking at lab-grown fish. We already know that lab-grown meat is a pet project of globalists around the world. And in fact, they may not be trying to necessarily recreate an apple, but create a new type of fruit that you might like and eat. Look at this from one of the lab technicians, the lead scientist, saying they've already done stem cell research or cell harvesting from blueberries, apples, cherries, feijoas, peaches, nectarines, and grapes. But much like lab-grown meats, the challenge is to create an end product that's nutritious and has a taste, texture, and appearance that consumers are familiar with. He says, in order to grow a piece of food that's desirable to eat, we will need more than just a collection of cells. So we're investigating approaches that are likely to deliver a fresh food eating experience. The aim isn't to try to replicate a piece of fruit that's grown in the traditional way, but rather create a new food with equally appealing properties. So, flavored fruit. Or, I don't know, I can't come up with something.
Fruit-flavored fruit.
Fruit-flavored, not fruit.
For it to have the energy needs that you would need out of fruit, because I mean that's basically you convert sun energy into sugars. That's basically how the energy system works. Where are they getting that energy to add to this fruit? Are they just growing fruit, mulching up fruit, regrowing the fruit, and then what?
So many questions.
You know what I hear? I hear a better fruit flavored mRNA. That's where my head goes.
Okay. Yeah.
That'll protect you.
It'll be a delivery. Yeah, it'll be a delivery method for things that they've we can't give it to them this way, but if we make these hybrids of these fruits, we can sneak stuff in there, and they'll never know because it'll taste like a banana.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's why you have these organic farmers saying, to make sure that they do not have mRNA in their cattle, et cetera, to make sure that stuff is kept away from them.
Right. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of Encino Man, where he goes to the 7-Eleven and he gets the fruit candy and he calls it the fruit group.
Right.
The meat group is a frozen burrito. fruit group is like sour straws. Like, that's what we're doing here? Okay. This same person, the same scientist, spoke to The Guardian and said, here in New Zealand, we're good at growing conventional horticultural crops. But looking at the future, there's a lot of change coming in the world with population growth, increasing urbanization, and climate change. So that piqued my interest, because climate change, you say, you want to do this because it would be better for the environment or easier. Okay, well, they might want to look into this study that we talked about just a few months ago, showing that lab-grown meat has a higher carbon footprint than traditional livestock farmed meat. Researchers at UC Davis found that what is called ACBM, or animal cell-based meat, ACBM. I'm just going to call it lab-grown meat. None of it rolls off the tongue. Anyway, it's much worse for the environment than traditional meat, because this is how it's made. You think that this looks like a better plan than having a cow on the field? Okay. Here's what they concluded about cell-based meat or lab-grown meat. The results indicate that the environmental impact of near-term ACBM production is likely to be orders of magnitude higher than median beef production if a highly refined growth medium is utilized for lab-grown production. So yikes, the UC Davis researchers found that lab meat could increase global warming between 4 and 25 times more than retail beef. So when you look at that chart, can we put that chart back on and we think like, well, there'd be a similar like beaker type test tube way of making lab grown fruit as the way that we're making lab grown meat. It's got to go through all of this. Of course, this is not going to be better for the planet than a tree, an apple tree or a cherry tree, right? Clearly, this who's thinking this is better? And it's interesting because we all buy into this BS because we know that meat is so demonized. We're told that it's not good for you. We're told that it's bad for the planet. All yada yada yada. Right? We haven't really seen demonization of fruit yet, as in we should not be eating that, and so this lab-grown alternative is here for you, and Bill Gates is going to spray it with his appeal. Yet. So be on the lookout for that. If that narrative pops up, that you shouldn't be eating fruit. I mean, a little bit it is. Like, Meghan Markle is an elitist because she eats, right? This was the whole thing about her on Oprah, because she wants an avocado per day. And so that makes her a bad person, because avocados are like the blood diamond of Mexico. So a little bit we see some demonization of fruit, but maybe not to the extent that we're about to see, because there is a lab-grown alternative they want to push on us. So eat fruit while you can, because it looks like we're getting fruit adjacent.
Yes. Well, as long as they pack it full of glucose, the Americans will love it. So
that's right.
I suppose.
That's right. Full of sugar, and they'll be happy about it.
And that's the thing I was getting at, is like there's so many processes out of like the natural growth of fruit where it's like, you're getting like amino acids being created. Like, is lab grown fruit going to do that? Are they going to have to inject like, where are they going to get the things that they have to inject in there? Because it's not a fruit's not just cells with sugar in it. It's there's actual like other things in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you look at that diagram, there was a little tub for amino acids and a little tub for glucose, like that was being put in there.
You're right. It is there, but that's in the meat. This is the meat diagram.
There's glucose going in meat?
Yeah, but because that's what energy is in the food cycle. It's basically just sugars. And
right.
So like they're going to have to be getting these nutrients from somewhere, because you can't naturally. They're not going to be in a lab creating nutrients. They're going to be in there like individually building amino acids. So like they're going to have to get this stuff from somewhere, and they're going to have to get it from fruit. So then it's just like fruit with more steps.
Right, exactly. We're going to take real fruit and highly process it into a fake fruit, and it'll have 80 ingredients like the Forever or the Impossible burgers, when you'd be better off actually eating a real burger.
Or picking an apple from a tree.
I'd be happier with this if they just said, we just wanted to see if we could do it. Then I'd be like, bam, go science.
Yeah.
Or like when they're like, we're trying to solve the world's problems. Like, you're not. You're not. You're creating more problems.
The impossible banana.
I want to know. Yeah.
Can you imagine these people come home from work and like, we're almost there, honey. We almost got a blueberry, or ish. Like, and this is gonna save the world. And you're like, no.
Honey, they're like, honey, how did you make that
from a
blueberry?
test
Well,
tube.
you know where we made this blueberry? From crushed up other blueberries.
Right.
Like, well, honey, glad you were gone all day.
Okay.
I folded the laundry while you were doing something really
We got
important.
it down to, it only takes 3 blueberries to make 1 blueberry now. We're getting close. We're getting close.
All right, maybe we're missing something. I don't know. We're watching this lab-grown production being pushed out in front of us. If you think that we're missing something, let us know. And if you are A-okay with eating lab-grown food, I mean, what's that much? I guess it's not that much different from like a sour straw or a fruit roll-up. That's lab.
It's not real
That's
food,
like
though. It's like
lab-made food. That's
You're
not
eating
real
this
food.
as like a fun little treat because you're at the arcade with your friends when you're 12 years old. I'm talking about myself.
Right. So no one's thinking that like, oh, this is better. People should just eat sour
Wake
straws.
up in the morning and have runts for breakfast, or Skittles.
Yeah.
Because it's shaped like a fruit.
I ate sour straws almost every day in college. I just loved them. So,
I used to buy big bags, the big plastic bag of runts, and would pick through and just try to eat the bananas. And I have so many people here in the chat right now that are saying, yes, the banana
Yes to
runs
banana
are the way
runs.
to
Yeah.
go. You are my people.
oh my
Yes.
gosh.
Well,
So
and
have you
also
tried
look at,
banana high chews?
No. What is that?
Oh yeah, try a banana high chew.
That's where you want to be.
Okay.
You can order them on Amazon. Order them. But I was just gonna say, like, look at all of the vegan foods that have tried to mimic like real foods, like vegan cheese, vegan meat, and all this stuff. And it's just like I'm always like, anytime I've ever taken a bite of any of that stuff, I'm just like, I mean, I can kind of see it's there, but like, I just can't imagine them being able to recreate the like a strawberry. Like a strawberry right out of the garden is just so juicy, and like how could they think that they could replicate that?
Yeah. This is me in the grocery store. I'll pick up like vegan butter and I'm like, okay, what's in it? And I'm like, you guys, you see that?
Yeah. Look at the 50 ingredients on this vegan butter. It's like all sorts of seed oil and stuff that's going to give you cancer. And like, it's so awful for you. Yes. Eat real foods, real meat. I mean, yeah. And
Real fruit while you can get it.
And we are big fans in this family of the carnivore code, eating basically the carnivore diet and eating very healthy meats. And really trying to like limit that. So, yeah.
Did you know, I'm going to share a fun fact no one asked me for, but that human teeth started to become misaligned when the Chinese invented utensils. And we are literally supposed to put our teeth in, like in even museums, you can see that prehistoric man that just like ate their food like that, kept their
grab a
teeth
drumstick
in
of
alignment
chicken and just eat
had
it.
perfect. My orthodontist was talking about this recently, and I've read it in several books before. So my daughter, my youngest, is losing her front teeth, and I'm like, we have to eat more like food without utensils now as her teeth come in because it will help the alignment. And so tonight we had ribs. Next week we're having roast chicken.
Yeah.
Like things I would literally want her to do that as her front teeth are coming in for that reason.
And our oldest daughter has like perfectly straight teeth because I always would joke with her. She would never use utensils. I'm like, Ava, what are you doing? And she's like grabbing a chicken bone. She's like, what, Daddy? And she's like,
She'll eat like rice.
she
with
eats
her,
like a barbarian. She eats like a cave woman.
But she has perfect teeth. Yeah, and this is documented. Anthropologists have
Look it
documented
up.
this before.
Science.
Yeah.
I'm throwing out all my utensils. They're gone.
Do you really have that many anyway?
It is amazing. Do the research. So it's pretty crazy about it. But yeah, it's true. All right. We've got more news to get to. We're going to cover Canada and then we'll get you out of here so you can go eat some meat and hang out for the rest of the night. But first, we want to tell you before we get to Canada and David Creighton's report on the trucker convoy, we want to tell you about what's happening with, am I doing this right?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We're going to talk to you about bio-optimizers because if you have problems sleeping, you can sleep better, faster, and deeper with this new product. Now, this is something that we do often because we have a dog that likes to bark at the moon every time there's a full moon. The dog goes nuts, wakes us up, tries to leave the house, and then we can't get back to sleep. So one of the things we really do rely on is magnesium to get back to sleep because it's a natural sleep sleep aid, and then you don't feel groggy in the morning. So Magnesium Breakthrough is a great way to have that if you have problems sleeping. Unlike other magnesium supplements that might be giving you 1 or 2 forms of magnesium, Magnesium Breakthrough contains all 7 forms of magnesium, designed to help calm your mind and help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. Clayton and I tried like a drugstore sleep aid not too long ago, a couple months ago. We were groggy the whole weekend. This is not what happens to you when you use magnesium. Over 75% of the population is magnesium deficient. And what most people know is that if they're taking magnesium, they're still deficient because they're not getting all 7 forms. So don't miss out on the most relaxing sleep ever with Magnesium Breakthrough. For an exclusive offer, our listeners can go to magbreakthrough.com/redacted. Use promo code redacted during checkout and save 10%. So again, that's an exclusive offer just for our listeners. You go to magbreakthrough.com/redacted, use promo code redacted.
So Sedan in our chat says, 1.5 years since the truckers in Ottawa, Canada showed the world what it's like to stand up to tyranny, stand up to the Trudeau government, inspired similar trucker convoys around the world standing up to COVID tyranny and government overreach. And 2 of the leading faces of that convoy in Canada, Tamara Lich and Chris Barber, just began their trial this week. It resumes today. David Creighton, journalist for the Human Events and Post Millennium, and has his own YouTube channel, Creighton's Right, is in the courtroom covering this trial. And we had a chance to catch up with David. Great to see you, David.
Nice to be back, Clayton.
So this is a remarkable court appearance for these 2. I mean, because the way that I've read some of these charges, it seems like commit mischief, intimidation, obstructing police is what they're charging them with. That this, in many ways, would be sort of treated almost like a traffic ticket, but instead, 16 days in a courtroom, and they could face jail time as a result of this.
And that's precisely the point I'd like to make today, Clayton, is that the authorities on a municipal, provincial, and federal level have put so much time and energy and money into prosecuting 2 people who merely came to Ottawa to peacefully protest. There were no guns, there were no explosives, there were no threats. It was the Ottawa and provincial police that threatened them. And literally at one point, a horse rode over a woman in a walker. Now that's a threat. That's violence. There was no violence in this protest, and yet they're bringing up charges that are so ridiculous. Mischief. Well, that's usually something when somebody comes home drunk, and it's usually resolved very quickly. But however, they have laid 4 charges that could actually add up to some time in jail here. And this is outrageous, but what it really means, and all it really means, is that Tamara Lich and Chris Barber are political dissidents. And I find this to be embarrassing because right now Canada is being watched by a lot of countries in the world, including our own and the United States, which is covering this quite closely. And we look like a dictatorship. We look like we're putting people on trial, not for crimes, not for terrorist activities, but because they merely opposed Justin Trudeau's COVID-19 mandates, which meant that you couldn't work if you didn't get vaccinated. And that's what they were fighting about. That's what they were protesting. And this is no different than the Soviet Union putting Solzhenitsyn on trial for being opposed to the Soviet Union. These people were opposed to Justin Trudeau's policies. That's all this was about, and that's all this is about this week and for the next 3 weeks.
Well, you said that the United States, in comparison to Canada, might look more like a democracy now, comparing it to a dictatorship. But just remind you of what happened on January 6th, of course, and the tyranny, the people that are behind bars, thrown away without any sort of, seemed like due process, weren't able to be released on bail, being held in solitary confinement for things that should have been given like misdemeanors or nothing. And so that's where we're at with these tyrannical governments now, throwing people in prison. Now, I know Tamara Lich, she was held in prison a couple of times, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was in jail for the first time without bail for about 21 days. She was finally released on bail on a judge's order. She attended a free speech awards dinner in Alberta. The police arrested her for attending that dinner, flew her back to Ottawa, and put her back into jail. She was there for another 30 days without bail until, again, she was released. But I talked to Tamara about this. I've interviewed her a number of times, and I said, how did you feel? What kept you going? Because she literally didn't know what was going to happen to her because they wouldn't tell her. And she didn't even know at that point what she was going to be charged with, except opposing the Trudeau government. And she just said she did a lot of praying, a lot of thinking, a lot of meditating, and she got through it. And I wrote the other day, I said, this woman is so courageous because she went through this and she had no idea. The worst thing about a criminal offense and going through the justice system is not knowing what's at the other end. And she was never given all the facts. She was never given all the information. And it's the same with Chris Barber. I mean, this is a trucker who decided he couldn't take the vaccination because he believed it was harmful to him. But he couldn't work because of that. He couldn't cross the border. He had to take that vaccine. He just said enough. And you know, you've been covering this hysteria that's going on right now about the return to these COVID-19 mandates. I don't think this trial could be at a more timely time because right now we've got the Ottawa Hospital going back to mask mandates.
Oh, geez.
We've got people screaming to bring back the lockdowns and the mandates again because we're on the cusp of another COVID outbreak, and it's all BS. We know it's all BS, and we know, and the same thing's happening with Joe Biden. His wife is sick, therefore we all got to mask up. The same thing is happening in Canada again, and I'm just waiting for these people, these same healthcare Gestapo people, to come down and say, everybody put on a mask, everybody lock down, because COVID's back.
You know it's coming. You know it's already coming. So you're in this courtroom. Just take me behind the scenes of what we're seeing now with this judge and the witnesses. So we were talking earlier, but it looks like they're going to have 26 witnesses. The Trudeau government is going to bring out 26 witnesses against these people. And what were some of the one of the first things that you reported on was about being called an occupation. The lawyers for Tamara Lich and Chris Barber on Tuesday said they would not tolerate the Freedom Convoy being labeled in these court proceedings as an occupation. What was the reasons for that?
Well, as Lawrence Greenspan, a very distinguished lawyer who's representing Tamara Lich, told me, he said, this is not just hyperbole and unnecessary, it's ridiculous. And they love to call it an occupation because what is the connotation of that? Well, you think of the Germans occupying Paris, and is there any similarity here? Not at all. In fact, when I tweeted the other day, or I say posted on X now, I got a response from somebody who said, talk to my grandfather who lived through the Nazis occupying Warsaw. And he showed me a picture of the Germans rounding up Jews. And that's an occupation. People coming to protest in Ottawa is not an occupation. I was there for the 2.5 weeks every day. I was out there in those frigid February temperatures. And all of the stories concocted about the Freedom Convoy setting fires to apartment buildings, totally false. Defecating and urinating on the streets, completely ridiculous. Leaving garbage everywhere. The whole thing was manufactured. Businesses had the complete freedom to stay open, and those that did stay open made a lot of money. I have never seen Ottawa cleaner, actually, than during the Freedom Convoy. They cleaned up after themselves, they provided their own food, and they lived in a very civil manner while they were here. They were not honking horns all night long. Once again, this is all artificial, manufactured information, largely from the Trudeau government, but also from the local Ottawa mayor, who was in hysterics every time he saw children in bouncy castles, which the truckers had set up for their kids to play with while they were there. He hated that. He said, why are these people not taking this demonstration seriously? I used to laugh because he came totally unhinged. The people who were unhinged during the Freedom Convoy and the ones who are becoming unhinged right now during the trial are the federal, provincial, and municipal authorities who set this whole thing up.
What's been the most surprising thing in the courtroom to you?
Well, I have to tell you, I'm surprised at the judge, because as I've reported oftentimes, every time a judge or a justice is set up to oversee anything involved with Freedom Convoy, the Emergencies Act declaration, COVID-19 mandates, there's always something a little bit suspicious about that judge's background. Now, this judge has been exceedingly fair so far. Yesterday, I watched her dismiss an email that the prosecution wanted to bring up while they were interviewing a Ottawa Police Service inspector. And the judge said, "Did he write that email?" And the prosecution said, "No, he did not." And she said, "Why are you introducing this as evidence then, if he did not write that email?" Now, that to me was a sign that she's not going to be brought down by the propaganda and by the pressure she's, I'm sure, feeling from a lot of powerful people in this city, in this province, and in this country. And I, from what I've seen so far, I think this is a fair judge who's going to adjudicate objectively.
What's next in the trial?
We're going to hear testimony from police for the next few days. I'm back tomorrow. But what's going to be very interesting is the testimony from so-called local residents that have been dug up by the prosecution to attest to how horrible life was during the occupation. So this is going to be interesting because a lot of these people have never told their story the same way when interviewed over at different times. And there's one woman who I'm very interested to hear, because she's bringing a class action suit against the Freedom Convoy. And I've heard some very interesting things about her dual citizenship. I can't comment further on that right now, but I think next week when she appears on Wednesday, this is going to be world news, because the prosecution perhaps should have suggested this individual not appear because she could be a liability to their prosecution. But I think she's going to be a boon to the defense.
Interesting. Well, we will cover it. We'll have you back as this trial unfolds. David Clayton, reporting at the courthouse or during the courthouse over the next 16 days in this very interesting Freedom Convoy trial in Canada. Thank you so much, David. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Clayton.
And I just want to say thanks to all of you for subscribing and being a part of our great community here. We put up a poll last night on the channel, and almost 60,000 of you responded in the poll, which is really, really amazing. So thank you so much for your engagement, seeking the truth alongside of us. We don't have all of the answers here, but we certainly are going to question everything. That is the goal of this show. And so thank you so much for subscribing to the show, turning on that bell notification so you get a notification when we go live. At least on YouTube. I don't exactly know how Rumble is doing it these days with notifications. I think they're getting better at it. But when you subscribe on Rumble, let us know actually in the Rumble chat. Like, do you guys get notifications now with Rumble? I know they were adding some things, so let's hope that that's the case. But either way, wherever you subscribe, we really, really appreciate it. We'll have content, very special content this weekend coming out. We want you all to make sure that you're subscribed to our Rumble channel specifically, because we have our big new documentary that's about to unfold on 9/11. So please subscribe. Make sure you're subscribed so you can see that and get exclusive access to that before anyone else gets to see it on YouTube. In fact, there's going to be a sort of a censored version that's going to go out on YouTube, unfortunately, but there's things that we simply can't show you. So you won't get to see the full experience on YouTube. So please make sure you're subscribed to our Rumble channel. It's just rumble.com/redacted, and you'll be able to see that documentary on 9/11. So guys, thank you so much for joining us this week. Much love to all of you, and we'll see you back here on Monday live at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Have a great weekend, everyone.